He wasn't looking for redemption, just a roof that didn't leak, and a little warmth to share with his old German shepherd. A Marine fresh out of service, scarred by war and forgotten by the world he once protected. But on a freezing night in Portland, when the snow turned the streets to glass, he found something the battlefield never gave him: purpose. A frail old woman, trembling beneath a torn blanket, left alone to die in the cold. He gave her his last meal, his only shelter, and asked for nothing in return. What he didn't know was that she wasn't a beggar at all. She was watching him, testing him, and what she'd reveal would turn his life upside down. They say God hides angels in rags. Maybe this time he hid one in combat boots. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And if you still believe kindness can rewrite a man's destiny, hit subscribe, drop an amen in the comments, and let's begin. The wind that morning carried the sharp scent of salt and rust from the docks of Portland, Maine. Snow had buried the streets in white silence, and the few cars that passed moved like ghosts across the frost-bitten world. Ethan Walker, 34, stepped out of an old blue pickup whose paint had long surrendered to salt and time. He was tall, lean, but strong, his movements precise in the way of a man who once measured danger by inches. A faint scar curved across his jaw, an old shrapnel kiss from Kandahar, and a dusting of beard hid the exhaustion carved into his features. His hair, cropped short out of habit, had begun to gray at the temples. 10 years, almost, in the U.S. Marine Corps had taught him how to survive anything except the quiet that comes after. Beside him padded Rex, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat, darker along the spine and fading to gold around his legs and chest. One ear bore a small tear from a wire fence in Afghanistan, a memory of a mission gone wrong. The dog's amber eyes never strayed far from Ethan's left hand, their unspoken line of command. They had crossed continents together, but now shared an exile measured in cold mornings and empty fuel tanks. Ethan lived out of his truck parked near the waterfront, sleeping in the back under a tarp that smelled faintly of motor oil. He spent his days searching for work, walking from warehouse to warehouse with a folded resume and a quiet hope. But veterans, he had learned, were easier to thank than to hire. "You'll need to adjust," one manager had told him politely before shutting the door. Adjust to what? To noise that wasn't gunfire? To nights without purpose? The question followed him like breath in cold air. That afternoon, the sky turned the color of pewter. Snowflakes began to fall, slow at first, then thick as ash. Ethan rubbed his hands together for warmth and climbed into the driver's seat, Rex curling beside him. He was about to turn the ignition when the dog lifted his head, ears sharp. A low whine pressed from his throat. Ethan followed the dog's gaze through the windshield. Near the corner of a boarded-up shop, an old woman sat hunched against the wind. She was wrapped in a blanket that might once have been pink, now the color of dirty snow. Her thin hands clutched a plastic grocery bag filled with nothing but air. People passed by, heads down, collars up, pretending not to see. Ethan hesitated. He had food enough for one meal, maybe two. The heater in his truck barely worked. Yet something in her stillness reminded him of the soldiers he'd left behind, the ones who stopped fighting long before they fell. Rex gave a short bark, impatient, almost commanding. Ethan sighed. "Yeah, buddy. I see her." He stepped out into the snow, boots crunching, and approached. The woman flinched as he neared, her eyes a cloudy blue, frightened but searching. She looked to be in her 70s, small and bird-boned, her face a map of years, spent weathering more than seasons. "Ma'am," Ethan said gently, crouching to meet her gaze, "you can't stay out here. Wind's cutting deep tonight." "I'll be fine," she murmured, voice brittle as thin glass. "People don't like trouble following them home." "Neither do I," he answered. "But I've got a roof, well, most of one. Come with me." She studied him, the lines around her mouth trembling. Then, quietly, "You won't regret it?" "If helping someone makes me regretful, I shouldn't have worn the uniform." He extended a gloved hand. After a moment, her frail fingers touched his palm, light as paper. He led her toward the pickup while Rex trotted ahead, tail low, occasionally glancing back to make sure she followed. They drove through the storm until the city lights dimmed behind them. Near the docks stood an abandoned storage shed, half-roofed with corrugated tin. Ethan pushed the door open, letting Rex sweep the corners first. Old habit. Inside it smelled of salt and dust, but it was dry. He set up a small camping stove and handed the woman his last can of soup, heating it slowly. When she tried to refuse, he smiled faintly. "Ma'am, I've eaten worse in better places. You'll do me a favor finishing that." Rex lay down near her feet, the warmth of his body a silent gift. The woman reached down, touching his head. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Saved my life more than once," Ethan replied. "Now he tries to save everyone." Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the world in white silence. The tin roof rattled with the wind, the small fire casting amber light across 3 tired faces. Ethan leaned back against the wall, watching the flames dance. For the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel empty. He thought of all the people who had turned away from the woman on the street, and of how close he'd been to doing the same. His chest tightened, not from cold, but from something else, something dangerously close to hope. The old woman finished her soup, her eyes softening. "You're a good man," she said. "Just trying to remember how," he answered. Rex sighed and rested his head on Ethan's knee. The wind howled outside, but inside the shed, a strange peace took hold. For the first time since leaving the Marines, Ethan Walker felt like he had done something that mattered. The storm raged through the night, snow clinging to the tin roof like lace. Yet within that broken shelter, a man, a dog, and a forgotten woman chanced warmth the world had denied them. And somewhere deep within Ethan, a feeling long buried stirred again, the quiet pulse of purpose, faint but alive. The morning broke pale and fragile, the kind of light that never fully conquers winter. Frost coated the edges of the tin walls, and each breath turned into mist before dissolving into the cold air. Ethan Walker stirred awake inside the abandoned storage shed by the docks, his muscles stiff from a night spent on a wooden floor. The faint crackle of frozen wind came through the cracks above. But the first sound that reached him wasn't the wind. It was the soft clinking of metal. He sat up sharply, instincts still wired for danger, only to find the old woman crouched near the camping stove, trying to light it. Her thin hands trembled, but her expression held quiet determination. Without turning, she spoke in a raspy voice that carried both age and pride. "Didn't mean to wake you, son. Thought I'd warm the place a bit." Ethan relaxed, exhaling through his nose. He pulled his coat tighter and approached. The woman looked smaller in the morning light, fragile almost to the point of translucence. But her eyes, a deep stormy blue, carried an intelligence that didn't fade with time. Her hair was a tangled silver, falling to her shoulders in uneven waves, and her face bore the lines of someone who had lived too long between struggle and grace. Despite the worn layers of clothing, there was something deliberate in the way she carried herself, a quiet dignity refusing to surrender. Ethan crouched beside her, adjusting the valve on the stove with a practiced hand. "Let me," he said simply. The flame came to life, flickering amber across the cold metal walls. For a moment, they sat in silence, the fire whispering between them. Then the woman turned to him. "You don't lock your doors," she observed. "Aren't you afraid I might steal something?" Ethan gave a dry chuckle, rubbing his palms together near the flame. "There's nothing here worth stealing. Just me, this mutt, and what's left of my decency." He nodded toward Rex, the German shepherd lying nearby with his head on his paws. The dog was awake but calm, eyes half open in patient watchfulness. His fur caught the morning light in shades of dark bronze and amber, the scar on his ear faint but visible, a reminder of the chaos they'd both survived. Rex's gaze drifted between them, as if assessing the moment. Then he yawned and thumped his tail once, satisfied. The woman smiled faintly. "He's loyal. Dogs like that usually follow people who need saving as much as they do." Ethan didn't answer. He reached for the small kettle, poured water, and handed her a cup of weak coffee. She accepted it with both hands, her fingers so thin the steam seemed to pass through them. When she finally spoke, her voice softened, as though unburdening a truth she had rehearsed. "My name's Agnes Miller. I used to teach art, back when I believed the world still noticed beauty." She gave a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Lost my house when the banks took everything. Guess the crash didn't care much for my watercolors." Ethan studied her face, the fine wrinkles, the steady composure. There was no bitterness, only fatigue, a quiet acceptance of how quickly stability can vanish. "You're a teacher," he said. "Then you know how to survive on less than you deserve." She nodded. "And you're a soldier. You know how to survive on less than hope." The words hit deeper than she realized. Ethan looked away, staring at the frost forming on the window. "Hope's a dangerous thing," he muttered. As the morning passed, they began to clean the place together. Ethan patched the broken roof with scraps of tarp he'd scavenged, while Agnes swept dust from the floor with a piece of cardboard. Rex followed them, nose to the ground, tugging an old blanket across the room as if to contribute. The air filled with the sound of small efforts, the kind that made survival look almost domestic. Agnes hummed a faint tune while working, something old and haunting. And for the first time in months, Ethan didn't feel like a ghost in his own life. By late afternoon, the light began to fade again. They sat together around the small fire. Ethan heated a can of beans and shared it 3 ways. The warmth returned to his hands, and the quiet between them had turned companionable. Agnes watched him carefully, studying the way his shoulders carried invisible weight. "You still dream of the war?" she asked softly. He didn't respond right away, only stared into the flames. "When it's quiet," he finally said, "I still hear the sandstorms, the men I couldn't bring home. Some faces never stop looking at you, even when they're gone." His voice trembled on the last word. Agnes didn't interrupt. She simply listened. Her eyes glistened in the firelight, and when she spoke, it was almost a prayer. "The ones who carry others out of the fire, they never walk free of it themselves. But God doesn't forget men like you, Ethan." He turned to her, surprised she remembered his name. He hadn't told her. Or maybe he had, half asleep, sometime during the night. He didn't ask. Instead, he gave a quiet nod, eyes softening. Rex moved closer, laying his head on the old woman's lap. Agnes smiled, stroking his fur with slow, gentle fingers. "You're a good boy," she whispered to the dog, then looked up at Ethan. "Both of you are." As the wind howled outside, Ethan placed his worn jacket over her shoulders before settling against the wall. The fire dimmed to embers. Agnes leaned back, her face half-shadowed, and for a fleeting moment, there was something unreadable in her expression. A depth of thought, perhaps guilt, or remembrance. Ethan was too tired to notice. He watched her eyelids lower and whispered, "Get some rest." Rex curled up between them, his tail brushing Ethan's boot. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet as forgiveness. Inside, 3 souls, bound by chance, survival, and something greater than either, found warmth in the smallest of mercies. But as Agnes drifted to sleep, her fingers tightened on the blanket, and her lips moved silently, as if reciting an old secret she couldn't yet let go. The morning began with the sound of tires on frozen gravel. Outside the warehouse, the pale sun struggled to break through the gray haze that hung low over the docks. Ethan Walker stood by the rusted door, rubbing warmth into his palms. He had grown used to the stillness of winter, the way cold made every sound sharper, every thought heavier. Rex lay by his boots, ears pricked, tail still. The dog sensed something before Ethan did. A vibration in the ground, a rhythm not made by wind or waves. The hum of an approaching engine grew louder until a black police SUV came into view, its blue lights muted under the thick morning fog. Ethan's heart tightened. In his world, authority rarely came bringing good news. The vehicle stopped a few yards away. From it stepped a man in his 50s, tall, broad-shouldered, his every movement neat and deliberate. His coat was tailored, black wool, the kind that didn't come from thrift stores. His hair, once dark, had silvered at the temples, and a pair of narrow glasses framed gray, calculating eyes. His name was George Hamilton, and he looked like the kind of man who measured people before deciding whether they mattered. 2 uniformed officers lingered behind him, but said nothing. George adjusted his scarf and looked at the warehouse with a faint curl of disdain. His voice, when it came, was smooth and precise, trained in courtrooms and board meetings. "Mr. Walker, I presume. You and your companion are trespassing. The owner of this property has filed a complaint. You'll need to vacate immediately." Ethan stepped forward, standing between the lawyer and the doorway. His posture, though calm, carried the quiet defiance of a soldier who had been ordered one time too many. "There's an old woman inside," he said evenly. "She won't survive out there in this cold." George's expression flickered with irritation. "The law doesn't bend for sentiment, Mr. Walker. Kindly move aside." He started toward the entrance, but Ethan didn't budge. His voice dropped lower, steady as the steel in his gaze. "You'll have to go through me first." From inside, a soft cough interrupted the standoff. The door creaked open, and Agnes Miller appeared, wrapped in Ethan's army jacket, her frail frame swallowed by it. Her silver hair caught the light like spun frost. "It's all right," she said quietly, though her voice trembled. "He means no harm." George froze. His eyes widened, his lips parting in disbelief. "Mrs. Miller?" he whispered, stepping closer. "Dear Lord." It is you." The tension in the air shifted. Ethan blinked, uncertain if he'd heard right. The lawyer removed his gloves and sank to one knee, an act of reverence that seemed out of place in a broken warehouse. "Ma'am," George said, voice unsteady now, "we've been searching for you for 2 weeks. The board assumed the worst, that you'd gone missing, maybe worse. There's a statewide alert, newspaper, headlines, search teams." He stopped, taking a shaky breath. "The Miller Foundation has been in chaos." Ethan's confusion deepened. He turned to the old woman, who looked down at her hands folded over the jacket, the ghost of a smile curling her lips. "You have some explaining to do," he said softly. George straightened his coat, regaining his composure. "You didn't know?" he asked Ethan, incredulous. "This woman is Agnes Miller, founder and chairwoman of Miller Estates, one of the largest real estate groups in Maine. She's one of the wealthiest women in the state." The words hit Ethan like a blow. For a moment, all he could hear was the crunch of ice beneath his boots. He glanced at Agnes, the woman he'd thought was homeless, frail, and forgotten, and saw her differently now. Her calmness, her deliberate silence, the grace in her movements. It had never been poverty that shaped her, but choice. Agnes met his eyes, her expression gentle but unwavering. "If I had told you who I was," she said quietly, "would you still have taken me in that night?" Ethan hesitated. The truth clawed at him. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I would have thought twice, maybe I would have doubted your need." His jaw tightened, the honesty raw in his voice. "But when I stopped that night, I wasn't thinking about who you were, just that you were freezing, and no one else would help." A silence hung between them, filled only by the soft whimper of the wind and the faint rattle of tin overhead. Then Agnes smiled, slow, genuine, her eyes kind in a way that pierced straight through the cold. "That," she said, "is exactly why you were the one meant to find me." Behind her, Rex barked once, short and sharp, as if sealing the truth of her words. George exhaled, half in disbelief, half in relief, already pulling his phone from his coat to call off the search teams. Ethan stood motionless, snow catching in his hair, unsure whether to feel betrayed or honored. Agnes turned toward him once more, her voice soft but certain. "Ethan Walker, you passed a test you didn't know you were taking. The kind that money can't buy. Compassion." Her gaze lingered on him, bright as starlight through winter fog. "Sometimes God sends us into the storm just to see if we'll stop for someone lost in it." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the sound of distant church bells from town. The cold felt different now, no longer cruel, only clean, like a promise remade in frost. The snow had not stopped since dawn. Fat flakes drifted lazily through the gray sky, falling like ash over the sprawling estate by Lake Crescent. Ethan Walker sat in the back seat of a black limousine, the hum of the engine barely audible beneath the soft hiss of the tires on the icy road. He looked out the window, watching as the trees blurred past, tall birches bent under the weight of snow, their branches whispering against the wind. The man felt out of place in the world that was waiting for him at the end of this road. He hadn't seen marble gates or manicured lawns in years. At 34, Ethan still carried the unmistakable bearing of a Marine, upright posture, squared shoulders, the sort of man whose every movement seemed measured and necessary. His face was carved in quiet endurance, angular jaw shadowed with 2 days of stubble, nose slightly crooked from an old break, and eyes the color of storm water. Those eyes held the memory of deserts, of friends lost, and of orders followed without question. He wore a faded green jacket, the same one that had crossed continents with him, and boots that told their own story of miles endured. His hands were scarred, not from violence alone, but from survival. Beside him, Rex sat alert, a 4-year-old German shepherd whose sable coat glowed gold-brown under the car's dim interior light. The dog's body was lean, muscles rippling beneath thick fur, every inch the picture of trained loyalty. His amber eyes scanned every motion outside with the precision of an instinct honed by war. For Rex, peace was something to guard, not something to trust. Ahead of them, Agnes Miller sat quietly, her frail frame nearly swallowed by the thick wool of her ivory coat. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, her pale hands folded in her lap. For a woman who had once appeared like a forgotten soul in the streets, she now looked every inch the figure of wealth and dignity. But there was no arrogance in her demeanor. Her gaze through the window was thoughtful, not proud. Beneath the expensive clothes and the power her name carried, she looked simply tired. When the limousine pulled into the long circular drive, Ethan's chest tightened. The mansion before him loomed grand and old, 3 stories of stone and glass that reflected the lake's frozen surface. Reporters stood behind barriers flashing cameras, their voices muffled by the snow. Security guards in dark coats moved in tight formation, and servants hurried to line the entrance steps. As the door opened, a wave of cold and noise rushed in. The moment Agnes stepped out, silence fell. Cameras clicked, heads bowed. "Mrs. Miller," someone gasped. "Thank God you're safe." Reporters shouted questions, microphones outstretched. But Agnes raised a frail hand, stopping them with the quiet authority of someone used to commanding rooms larger than this one. She turned to Ethan, her lips curving into a soft, knowing smile. "Come inside, Sergeant. I owe you warmth and truth." Ethan followed her through the towering doors into a hall that smelled faintly of cedar and polish. Every surface gleamed: chandeliers, brass railings, marble floors that reflected their steps. Portraits hung on the walls, men and women in fine dress, the ancestors of wealth. It all felt foreign to him, the kind of place where silence had weight and comfort felt earned only through generations. He felt Rex's presence beside him like an anchor. They entered a sitting room overlooking the frozen lake. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth licking at the edges of the cold. Agnes gestured for everyone to leave. Guards, maids, and aides hesitated only a second before filing out, leaving the 3 of them, a soldier, a dog, and a woman whose secrets had just rewritten the story of his life. Agnes removed her gloves slowly, folding them with care. "You're wondering why I did it," she said finally, her voice calm but steady. Ethan remained standing, unsure if he should sit on the pristine white couch that looked like it belonged to another world. "I've been wondering that since the warehouse," he admitted. "Why would someone like you pretend to be homeless?" She met his eyes, and for the first time he saw a shadow of pain there, old, deep, and familiar. "Because I had to know," she whispered. "You see, I've spent decades surrounded by people who smiled when I walked in. Not out of kindness, but calculation. They gave gifts when I gave more. They said the right things until I stopped funding them. When I disappeared, none of them came looking for the woman I was. They only searched for the fortune I carried." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen betrayal in many forms, On battlefields, it wore uniforms. Here, it wore silk. "So you wanted to test people," he said quietly, "to see if anyone would help without knowing who you were." Agnes nodded, a bittersweet smile on her lips. "Exactly. I wanted to believe that in this world, kindness still existed without a price tag attached. And then, there was you." Ethan shook his head, almost embarrassed. "I didn't do anything special. I just saw someone freezing and stopped." Her laughter came soft, like a chime against the fire's crackle. "That's precisely what makes it special, dear boy. Most people today see suffering and step over it. You stopped." She leaned forward slightly, the light catching her face, a face lined by years of grief and wisdom. "You didn't ask my name, my past, or what you'd gain. You simply acted. And that's something I haven't seen in a long, long time." Rex, as if understanding, placed his head gently on her lap. Agnes smiled down at him, stroking the dog's thick fur. "Even he knows. Animals always do." Then she looked back at Ethan, her tone turning deliberate. "I'd like you to work for me, Ethan. Not as a charity case, as my personal protector. Not because I fear for my safety, but because I believe the world could use more men like you near the ones who've forgotten what decency looks like." Ethan stared into the fire. Part of him wanted to refuse. Pride was a stubborn companion. But another part, the one that remembered cold nights and hungry mornings, knew that this offer wasn't just about money. It was about trust, something he hadn't been given freely in years. He looked down at Rex, who wagged his tail once and gave a soft bark, as if casting the deciding vote. Ethan exhaled, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "If you're sure you want a soldier instead of a butler," he said. Agnes's eyes glimmered with warmth. "I don't need a butler," she replied. "I need someone who still believes that helping a stranger is worth the risk." That evening, as the snow continued to fall outside, the three of them sat in the garden by a brick fireplace. The flames cast long shadows across the frozen roses and the marble angels that stood watch from the hedges. Agnes sipped tea, Rex dozed beside her, and Ethan sat quietly, his heart thawing for the first time in a long while. "There are battles you'll fight with guns," Agnes said softly, watching the flames dance. "And others you'll fight with compassion. The second kind, Ethan, is the one that changes the world." He said nothing, but his eyes reflected the firelight, steady, resolute, and alive again. The winter sun in Portland, Maine rose weakly through a pale sky. Its light stretched thin across the frozen lake behind the Miller estate. The snow had been falling since dawn, covering the grounds in a hush so complete that even the crows seemed to whisper. Inside the grand glass conservatory, Ethan Walker stood near the tall window, watching his breath fog the glass. It had been almost a year since he'd first met Agnes Miller, the woman who had once tested his kindness in a snowstorm. A year since he'd learned that sometimes the richest hearts hide beneath the simplest coats. Ethan had changed, though he didn't always see it. His military posture had softened, the edges of his discipline now shaped by compassion instead of duty. His hair was shorter now, neatly combed, and his eyes, still that same steel blue, had regained a quiet spark. He had found purpose again, not through orders or battle, but through something gentler. Across the room, a banner hung proudly on the wall. "Second Winter Foundation. Because no one should be left in the cold." The foundation had become Agnes's final mission, and Ethan had been her right hand in building it. Together, they turned her wealth into warmth. Shelters for veterans, recovery programs, job training, homes rebuilt for those forgotten by the system. Ethan's name appeared on brochures now, though he hated seeing it. To him, he was just doing what any Marine should do, protecting people. Only now he was fighting a different kind of war. Rex sat faithfully at his feet, now 5 years old, his fur thicker, his muzzle dusted faintly with gray. The German Shepherd had become the Foundation's symbol, his amber eyes appearing on posters and billboards across the state with the campaign slogan, "No one left in the cold." Children loved him. Veterans recognized the discipline in his stance. Strangers stopped to pet him at public events, not realizing that behind those calm eyes was a soldier too, one who had seen fear, loss, and yet still trusted the world enough to wag his tail. Agnes Miller, now 73, was slower in her steps, but still sharp in her gaze. She sat near the fire in her favorite velvet armchair, a cream blanket draped across her knees, her silver hair soft around her face. Her health had declined in recent months, but her spirit never dimmed. When she spoke, her voice carried the same warmth that had melted through Ethan's guarded heart a year ago. "Do you know, Ethan," she said, smiling faintly, "I used to think wealth was meant to keep people safe, but I've learned it's meant to set them free, to give others another winter." Ethan turned from the window, a gentle smile tugging at his mouth. "You've changed a lot of lives, Agnes. You gave people hope." She shook her head slowly. "No, you did that. You and that remarkable dog. I only followed where kindness led." Her eyes lingered on Rex, who had settled near her chair, his head resting on his paws. She reached down and brushed his ear with her thin fingers. "He never leaves your side, does he?" "Not once," Ethan replied. "He's loyal, probably more than I deserve." Agnes chuckled softly. "That's what loyalty is, Ethan. It's love without condition. You taught him that. Or maybe," she added, looking into the fire, "maybe he taught it to you." That night, the snow outside thickened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan checked in on Agnes before bed. She was resting peacefully, her breathing slow but steady, a faint smile still on her lips. He turned off the lamp, whispered goodnight, and left the door slightly ajar. Rex lay by her door, as if standing guard one last time. The next morning, the sun rose quietly over the frozen lake. The house was still, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. When Ethan entered Agnes's room, the fire had gone cold. She sat in the same position as the night before, her expression serene, as if she had simply drifted into a dream she didn't plan to return from. On her lap lay a sealed envelope, his name written in her careful hand. For Ethan. His fingers trembled as he opened it. The letter inside was written in delicate cursive. The ink faded slightly from her unsteady hand. For Ethan, the man who saved me without ever knowing I needed saving. You taught me that goodness still breathes in this world. You reminded me that even the coldest hearts can be warmed again. When I first met you, I was testing humanity. When I left, I was trusting it again. Please keep the fire burning. Let the world feel what you showed me. That kindness is the last uniform a soldier should wear. Ethan stood there for a long moment, unable to move. The snow outside seemed to fall slower, as if heaven itself had paused. Rex nudged his leg gently, sensing the shift in the air. Ethan knelt beside him, pressing his forehead to the dog's. "She's gone, buddy," he whispered, voice breaking. "But she left us a mission." Later that day, the Foundation unveiled a new plaque outside its headquarters, a silver plate that caught the winter light. The inscription read, "Kindness is the last uniform a soldier should wear." As the crowd gathered, Ethan stood silently beneath the falling snow, his coat dusted white, Rex sitting proudly by his side. The cameras flashed, but he didn't notice. His mind was on a quiet warehouse a year ago, on a trembling old woman under a torn blanket, and on the choice that had changed everything. The snow fell heavier, blanketing the streets of Portland in pure white, not the cold kind, but the kind that made the world look reborn. And in that stillness, Ethan felt it. The quiet miracle Agnes had left behind. The snow kept falling over Portland, blanketing the town in a silence that felt almost sacred. Ethan stood before the plaque, Rex by his side, and for the first time in years, he understood. Miracles don't always arrive as thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come disguised as small acts of kindness, as a hand extended to a stranger, or as a loyal dog who refuses to leave your side. God's miracles rarely shout. They whisper. Through people who stop, who care, who love without asking what they'll gain in return. Agnes's life was changed by one simple choice, and so was Ethan's. And maybe that's how heaven works. Not through grandeur, but through grace. In our everyday lives, we all walk past someone standing in the cold, maybe not with snow, but with loneliness, pain, or despair. Be the warmth in that storm. Be the miracle someone prays for. If this story touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment of Amen, and subscribe for more stories of faith, redemption, and love between people and between man and God. May God bless you, protect those who serve, comfort those who suffer, and remind us all, kindness is the language of heaven spoken on earth.